too. I'm really excited today to have Ahmed Honeini, who is an Honorary Research Associate at Royal Holloway. And he's going to be talking to us today about turning the PhD into a book, that kind of really important milestone when you kind of embark on an academic career. So thank you for joining us today, Ahmed.
No worries at all. Glad to be here.
So the first question to ask is what's the biggest difference between a PhD thesis and an academic monograph?
Sure. There are two core differences to the way I see it between a PhD thesis and a monograph, and that is the audience and the content. So to talk a little bit about the audience first. The PhD thesis is a document that's designed to be primarily read by 3 or 4 people, so your supervisors and your examiners. A monograph, by complete contrast, is designed to be read by the global academic community, and even non-academic specialists, such as students or lay readers who have a particular interest in your topic. So when you're approaching the possibility of turning your PhD thesis into a monograph, you need to think about the monograph as a significant work that is going to define you and your interests as a scholar, particularly if you're in the early stages of your career. In terms of content, PhD theses typically include a literature review in your introduction and an overabundance of quotations from scholarly sources. Now, in the context of a PhD thesis, that's entirely normal. Your examiners want to know that you have an intimate and detailed knowledge of the field, and so making constant references to the criticism is part of the course. In a monograph, however, literature reviews and methodology sections and chapters are on the whole inappropriate and unnecessary to include. You've certainly got to situate your book's argument in the broader critical debates in your field, of course, but more importantly, you need to be sure that you've amplified your own scholarly voice and authority. Your readers are going to go to your book in part because of your expertise in the field. So you need to appear confident in your writing and not overtly dependent on other figures or major voices in your discipline. So those are the two key differences, I think, the audience on the one hand and content on the other.
Yeah, great. And so when you kind of start the process of turning the PhD into a book, you're kind of looking at all these different publishers. How do you go about picking the right publisher for your book?
No worries. So that's a difficult question because it's dependent on a number of factors. So first, are you looking for a traditional university press like Oxford, Cambridge, Manchester, Edinburgh, Harvard, Princeton, Chicago, on and on and on? Or are you looking for a more mainstream commercial academic publisher? So Routledge, Palgrave, Bloomsbury, Wiley, Brill, and so on. The process of publishing with a university press as a general rule is much more protracted and time-consuming than it is with an academic publisher. So depending on where you find yourself in your career, if you've just graduated, for example, or if you're in a full or part-time post, or even if you've just sort of taken a few years out to develop your ideas from your thesis, you need to bear these questions in mind and sort of, weigh the pros and cons between a university press and a general academic press, very carefully. In terms of choosing a publisher more generally, you should look at the catalogs of publishers you're interested in working with, or who you recognize as having published good quality work in your field. So ask yourself, have they regularly published books in about the particular, say, literary or historical period that you work on? Do they have a particular series of titles that your book might fit well in? Finally, the need to publish your work open access is becoming increasingly prevalent and important throughout the worldwide academic sector. So if you're looking to, or are even required to publish your book open access, for example, if you have to meet certain ref requirements, you need to check the publisher's guidelines to get a sense of the costs that are involved, and more importantly, whether you can access any areas of financial support to offset those costs.
You've got your book, you've started to turn it into a monograph, and you found the right publisher, which is a good fit for you. And you're thinking about the book proposal. What goes into a book proposal?
So every publisher will have their own set of guidelines for preparing your proposal, and these guidelines will typically be on their website, or if you want to be extra brave, they'll be provided to you by an acquisitions editor if you choose to contact one before beginning work on the proposal in earnest. You should closely adhere to the guidelines that you're provided with, but in general terms, a book proposal contains about 7 core elements. The first is a statement of aims, which is around which is a statement of around 1,000 to 1,500 words, in which you offer an overview of your monograph as a whole, and within which you make your central argument clear. You situate your book in terms of the broader scholarly debate surrounding your topic, and you make clear what you hope to achieve and accomplish or conclude through your study. Publishers are particularly interested in seeing or being made aware of the originality of your work. So if you can confidently say that your book is the first full-length study of a particular topic, definitely point that out in your proposal, because by doing so, you'll make the prospect of publishing your book even more attractive. The second component is a detailed synopsis, including chapter summaries and keywords. Here you have the opportunity to outline your introduction, your conclusion, and your individual chapters. Each summary should be around 300 words long. So you've got a fair amount of space to be detailed, but you mostly need to be direct and succinct. You should also include around 10 keywords associated with your chapter, which will most likely also be used later when preparing marketing material for your book. The third component is a description of the target market. Here you need to detail who your book is written for. Nearly all monographs are intended for an academic readership of some sort, including students, doctoral researchers, and established scholars in your field. If you can provide examples of specific university courses that will likely include your book in their reading list, so say 20th century American literature, or the 1960s civil rights movement, for instance, you should be sure to mention that. You should also specify journals, publications, learned organizations, and societies worldwide that your book will appeal to. So if you're writing about an American topic, for example, BAS would be an obvious organization to include. Finally, if you've identified a particular book series that your chosen publisher has, say studies in 20th century literature, mention that your monograph may be best suited or best located in that particular list. The fourth component is a review of competing titles. Here you should specify any books or edited collections which address material directly related to your monograph. You should address the ways in which your book is building upon or challenging the work in these titles. And if a book exists that is very similarly themed to yours, what sets your book apart in terms of originality and content? It's really important to address that. The fifth component is format and timescale. Here you should give the date by which you plan to submit your completed manuscript to the editor. Be aware that this date will almost certainly be included in the publishing contract that you sign. So there are going to be legal ramifications if you fail to submit your work by that date. So I say this as a means to say, think logically and realistically, and give yourself plenty of time in which to complete your work. You should also specify the total word count of the book and its individual chapters, including footnotes and references. Monographs, particularly first monographs, are between 75 to 90,000 words long. The sixth component is additional information for authors submitting dissertations. Now, this is by far the most important section of your proposal in terms of turning your thesis into a monograph. Editors and reviewers will want to know when the thesis was examined, what the outcome of the viva was, so if you passed with no corrections or minor and major corrections, what your examiners thought of the thesis. You don't have to give your entire reader's report, but you can give a few choice quotes. And crucially, whether the thesis is embargoed on your university's e-thesis depository. Universities will typically agree to embargo your thesis for at least 2 years and potentially even up to 5 years, given proper justification. So make absolutely sure that your thesis is not openly available for download when you submit your proposal. The editors will also want to know what modifications you're going to make when converting the thesis into a book, especially if you plan to include any new materials. Are you going to completely change the book structure? Are you going to include new or radically altered chapters? If so, how long do you envisage that these changes are going to make? The editors and reviewers want clear evidence that you carefully thought through these changes, and they also want evidence that you don't just intend to publish the thesis in its unedited form, which is not likely to happen anyway. And the last component is supporting documents. So you should include sample materials, so sample 1 or 2 draft chapters which have been adapted from the thesis. Or even if you're that far along in your preparation, the entire manuscript. These materials will help your editors and reviewers make an informed decision about the quality of your work and whether they recommend your book for publication. You should also include details of academic readers who you suggest may be best suited to reviewing your proposal, a book blurb and keywords that again can be used for marketing purposes, a proposed table of contents, and information about yourself, including an up-to-date CV. So it's a long list, but it's very specific. So, you have some sense of guidance and direction.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really comprehensive. And it's nice to kind of hear it broken down. So the last question I want to ask you is just how long does this whole process take? How long does it take to go from completed PhD thesis to monograph?
Sure. The short answer is a considerable amount of time, but if you want me to be more specific, I will be. So preparing the proposal and the sample materials will take around 3 months, give or take. You should get feedback on your proposal from your colleagues and your mentors. So for example, heads of department or ex-PhD supervisors or anyone that you know has direct knowledge of publishing a book. And you should also carefully edit the sample materials that you provide so that they're easily readable and relatively free of jargon. If your reviewers are ecstatic about your proposal and sample chapters and recommend outright publication of your book, fantastic. That's the best answer that you could possibly get. And you can get to work on your manuscript immediately after being issued a contract. The sad reality is more realistically, reviewers are highly unlikely to recommend, especially first monographs, to be published outright and not undergo at least some form of revision and resubmission. So you'll therefore need to read and reckon with your reviewers' reports. So once you have the reviews, and take a few days to steel yourself, and then just sort of dive into and embrace the positives and the negatives in those reports. And depending on the extent of the recommendations that the readers have made, the nature of your revisions could potentially be relatively minor, or more seriously require a major and time-consuming overhaul. Now, once you have your contract, the preparation for your final manuscript can take at least a year in some cases, if not more, depending on the nature of the changes and the modifications that you want to make or are required to make because of the reviewers' reports. If you want to include new chapters and materials in the existing chapters, you will need to factor in writing and research time. Again, be realistic. Don't rush yourself or agree to a submission deadline you know deep down you're not going to be able to meet. You'll also need to set aside a significant amount of time to edit your work and make sure that your manuscript is as close to publishable as possible. The manuscript will be edited by a professional copy editor, of course, but you should make the copy editing process as quick and streamlined as possible. And finally, once your manuscript has been submitted, the book can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to be published. So make sure that you're in regular contact with your editor in case they have any queries about correcting proofs, indexing, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's the general sort of journey to converting a PhD thesis into a book. It can be daunting, but we've all been there, and it's once you get the hang of it, and once you get feedback and advice and guidance, hopefully it'll be a good enjoyable journey.
Yeah, and worth it in the end, hopefully.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, thank you so much, Ahmed, for your really, really helpful insights that I'm sure will benefit everyone in the BAS early career community. But thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you very much.